Hey, what's up guys? I'm Josh, and last time I did a tier list, it was for headphones, and you guys absolutely killed that video. So today we're gonna be doing it again, but for headphone amplifiers. A little bit of groundwork before we get started. This is only going to include amplifiers. This is not going to include DAC amps. This is not going to include amps and streamers. This is only pure amplifiers, balanced, unbalanced, doesn't matter. This is going to be a recommendations list. So this list is in priority of what I think you should purchase and why. And so even though there are things that are fantastic, I am going to put them lower on the list because they're just simply not something that I would recommend getting for various reasons. Okay, so let's start with the first and most popular, which is going to be the THX AAA 789. This amplifier is an absolute unit. The price for this thing right now is actually $250, which is a screaming deal. Like, I don't even know how they're making it for that because originally it was sold for $400. So I'm gonna put this in A tier. The reason why this is A tier is because it's incredibly clean. Like this is a great example of a solid state amplifier. If you like the solid state sound, this is a good representation of that. Some people call this thing a little bit over sharpened. I think that actually may be a benefit depending on where you're coming from. If you already have a really clinical headphone, it's not gonna be a benefit. But if you're working with something that could use a little bit of extra clarity or a little bit extra sharpness, I think the 789 is a great match for it. Like a lot of the LCD series run really, really well with it. Then you have the SMSL SH9. This amplifier is good, but knowing that it's the same price as the 789, but it doesn't quite sound quite to the level of the 789, doesn't produce as much power as the 789. I'm gonna put it a little bit behind the 789, I think, though it does have one big advantage, which is the screen in the front. So I'm gonna stick this one in C tier, actually. I think it's a good amplifier. I think the screen is valuable, but I think for sound quality, it does fall a little bit behind some of the competition around its same price tag. And so I don't know, don't like it as much as the other option. Let's go ahead and do another SMSL, which is gonna be the SP400. This amplifier is a powerhouse. It's very big. It also is very flat, but it's got one major flaw in my opinion, which is the gloss top. It's also fairly pricey, coming in at $600, even though it does produce quite a bit of power. I think the sound quality, I'm gonna stick it in C tier again. I think it's impressive and it sounds good, but it doesn't sound great. And I do think that there are other amps in here that beat it for features or build or sound for about the same cost. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. So then you have the HPA4. This amplifier was regarded for a very long time as being the best measuring solid state amplifier that you could get. They used THX technology really early on, and now it's been more popularized by things like the THX 789 and things like that, but they really were kind of earlier into that THX world. Unfortunately, now the price tag seems a little unjustified because you actually have amps like the Topping A90, which we'll talk about in a second, that performs almost exactly the same, but for a drastically reduced price tag. So I'm gonna actually put this thing in D tier. Now, the reason why this thing is going in D tier is because I just simply can't recommend it, not in the modern landscape. It's very, very good. It's one of the best amplifiers even still today. It's built very, very nice too. It sounds wonderful actually, but that's not enough for me to recommend spending so much more money on it than the competition, which does just about the same job in the same way. Now on the flip side, you have the Magni Heresy. This thing is killer, and this is actually gonna encompass the whole Magni line, but I would look at the different use cases and different styles of the Magnis. You had the standard Magni 3 Plus, you had the Magni Heresy, and you had the IE Magni. Now I use the IE Magni because it kind of encompasses everything sort of the best, and it's the most wide ranging, but specific to your needs, you may need something for IEMs, or you may not have any IEMs, which the Heresy will be just fine if you don't have IEMs. But on the opposite end, the HPA4, I feel like the big disadvantage to that amplifier is the price. I feel like the major advantage of the Magnis is the price. So that's why they're going S tier. What the Magnis are is just the first stop. Like if you're just getting into this hobby and you just want to see what a good amplifier sounds like, that's where you can go. And you can stay in it for so long. It's so capable and so versatile now. And for $120, it's literally unbeatable in my opinion. Okay, next is gonna be my favorite amplifier as a whole, which is my daily driver, the Topping A90. Okay, now even though the price to performance is not double that of the 789, like the specs are not better by double on the A90 than they are the 789, but the price is half on the 789. If your budget is $250, I would recommend the 789. It's a fantastic amplifier. But if you want basically the best thing you can get for $500, that I think is the best thing that you can get for $500. And this is the amplifier that almost spec for spec competes or beats in some areas the HPA4, though it doesn't have a screen, but again, it's $2,500 less than the HPA4 is. And so for that, I think it goes in S tier personally. I think the thing is great. I couldn't live without it. I use IEMs on it. I use super heavy demanding planars on it. It's just wonderful. Okay, we have our first F tier. This is gonna be the topping L30. Why? Because it was frying people's headphones. So it's risky. Like it was, for whatever reason, just destroying people's headphones if certain events took place in the amplifier. It would fry and break, which sucks. Don't like that very much. So that one's going in F tier. Don't recommend it. Buy a different amplifier. Now the L30 was coming in at $150. It did measure really well. That was one of the big advantages with it. It didn't have a ton of power. It was decently powerful, but it wasn't a powerhouse, but it measured really well. The problem is that it just had something in it that would just fry the amplifier and potentially your headphones, and that is a big no-no. Okay, so topping A30 Pro. I love this thing. I actually have a review that I'm working on right now of it. I haven't released a review yet, but it's in the works. It is fantastic. It's like a mini A90, which I love. The form factor is great. It's also kind of got this sort of unique heatsink design on the top with the holes in the sides and stuff. It's actually a really good amplifier. The one and only thing that I don't like about it, and I wish it had, that the A90 has, is the pre-out switch on it. So the A90 has like a physical switch that you can switch between the pre-out and the headphone out. I wish this would have a physical switch. If it did, I definitely put it in A tier, but just for usability, for me personally, it doesn't quite have the perfect usability. And so I'm gonna put it in A tier along with the 789. Now the A30 Pro is $350. Now that kind of puts it in an interesting comparison with the 789, because the 789 is $100 cheaper and the performance is very, very close. But they both use very different technologies. The 789 is using the AAA technology, and the topping is using the NFCA technology, which is nested feedback composite amplifier, I think. Very different techs, very similar spec results. I do think that people consider the NFCA to be a little, or at least the 789 in comparison, because there's multiple AAA topologies. The NFCA stuff is regarded as being a little bit more neutral. It doesn't have that over sharpening effect of the 789. I don't necessarily think it's $100 better though, but it is smaller, it has an internal power supply, and it's got the capability of matching perfectly with the DAC, which is the D30 Pro, which I also have. And that's one downside to the 789, is that it doesn't actually have a matching DAC option that measures as well as the amplifier does. They did have that R2R thing for a while, but they've since stopped producing that, and that was only a single-ended DAC, whereas the 789 is a balanced amplifier. Gustard H16. I like the H16. I'm gonna put it in B tier. It's a little bit more expensive. I think it's coming in at $400. It is a brick of a unit. It's very solid. It's actually pretty well made. It also does come with a remote, which is an advantage over the A30 Pro and the 789, but I don't think it sounds as good as either of those. I don't think it's quite up to the level of those. It's a little bit warmer than what I would consider to be a perfect neutral. And for some people, that's really gonna be a benefit. But the added price of the Gustard, to me, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you really need the remote support. Because this one's coming in at $400, that's $150 more than the 789 and about $50 more than the A30. Now the Aune X7S, this is an interesting one. I think this has either been discontinued or is very hard to find right now. The price to performance is just not great these days, even though back in the day it was actually really cool because it was like one of the only cheap Class A balanced output amplifiers available. And even though it was small, it was like dense. It was really nice. The build quality was really great. They also had like a lot of stack options, but today at $290, I don't feel like the specs or the sound quality really compete. Even though it's still a very good amplifier, I just feel like it's just not quite up to the standard of today for the price. Okay, then you have the Schiit Magnus. I'm gonna stick this puppy in A tier. This is an A tier amp because it's $200 and it's kind of like a balanced bigger brother version of the Magni. Thus the name Magnus, you know, real smart there. This thing is actually pretty great. I would actually consider it to be not quite as good as the 789 personally, but the $50 extra, I feel like you kind of, you know, when you're getting down into this price, $50 is sort of a kind of a big deal. You know, it makes up a large portion of the percentage of the price, whereas, You know, if you're talking about $1,000, $50 more is not that much more percentage wise, but at 250 and 250 bucks is a big portion of the price. And it does have options to be paired with the Modius to make a truly balanced stack, which is pretty good for the price. For 400 bucks, that'll get you a balanced DAC and amp stack. It looks good. It sounds good. Sound quality comparisons between the 789 and the A30 Pro and the Magnus though, since they're all kind of in the same category. The 789 is a little bit sharper. It's a little bit more dynamic, I think. I think the Magnus kind of falls a little bit behind in dynamics and doesn't quite hit as hard in the neutrality department as the A30 does. But still at $200, it's a really strong performer. It's got a lot of power for the output and pretty good specs. So it's pretty nice. Okay, then you have the Dark Voice 336 SE. So this has an unfair component to it. It's got this factor where it measures terribly. Like, it's not a good measuring amplifier, but the point of them is to be distorted. So if you're coming at it from the perspective, but then you're kind of in this weird territory of if it's purely for subjectivity and it's not to measure well, and it's just to sound a specific way to appeal to a specific person, then this is really going to come down to person. So I'm going to stick this in, I think I'm going to stick this in B tier. The reason why I'm going to stick it in B tier, specs, terrible. The build is half awesome. Like, it's really shitty components, but it's like a large, heavy, dense device, and it feels nice when you take it out of the box. Like, it feels substantial. But you can also modify the living hell out of this thing and really make it sound any way you want to make it, which is a benefit that you can't do with a lot of these other amplifiers on here. And I think the reason why I'm sticking it in B tier as opposed to C or D or even F, because for specs, it would definitely be F. It'd be like negative F. The reason why is because I just enjoy using it. And that's where that subjectivity part comes along. So not everybody's going to like the stock sound quality, and it's not good with every headphone, but on the right headphones, it's actually pretty awesome. Oh, and the price for that is about $300 right now, though it kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's $280, sometimes it's $320. So just look around for it, see if you can get it on a deal. Okay, now next up we have the WA33. This is in the same boat as the HPA4. It's the best sounding tube amp that I've heard. It is, but it's $7,000, and that's just the cheap version. They have like an upgraded version, but I can't remember exactly right now what the upgrade was, but it bumped it up to like $14,000 or $15,000, which is nuts. But admittedly, it is the best tube amplifier that I've heard in terms of sound quality. I just think it sounds so great. It's God tier. Actually, it would seem like kind of a deal actually. But if you were to pair the Abyss AB1266 and a really, really high-end DAC and the WA33, you're legitimately talking about a potential HE1 beater, not even competitor, a beater. Like, you could beat the HE1, and that's not exaggeration. I've had a review of the HE1, and I've spent a lot of time with the AB1266 and a lot of time with the WA33. It's phenomenal. But that price tag is just killer. It's also an enormous device. It's kind of difficult to use. You got to wait for it to heat up like a lot of the other tube amps. And it's like physically just huge. So it's like, the usability factor is a little low for it. But to be fair to the HPA4, I stuck that in D tier because even though it sounds good, it's enormously expensive. Same thing with the WA33. It sounds great, but it's very, very expensive. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I would love to know where you would place these. So leave it in the comment section down below what tier you would. The bottom line for almost all these amplifiers, except for the F tier L30, I would highly recommend all of them if you have the budget and you like the features of it. Sort of in that middle category, that B to C category is where things are like, well, there's not really a major reason to get it. That's why it's not higher in the list. There are a lot of things that beat it for either equivalent or better prices with the same feature set or the same sound quality or even better sound quality. So that middle territory is really weird. But those high-end amps like the WA33 and the HPA4, if you got the money, man, they're really, really great. But if you're considering the HPA4, I might pick up the A90 first and just try it and see if you like it, because it's pretty baller. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for watching. Till the next video, my name's Josh, signing off.